And welcome to the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast here on STLSportsPage.com. Rob Reigns joined as always by Mike Reigns. Mike, how are you today?
Good. Glad to be here.
We're, of course, in the middle of some exciting playoff baseball, and we're coming to you on taping this podcast before Game 2 of the National League Championship Series between the Dodgers and the Mets, and before Game 1 of the American League Championship Series between the Guardians and the Yankees. And I think, Mike, one thing we both agree on is that even if there's no Cardinal baseball postseason to watch, at least we have a lot of former Cardinals to be paying attention to.
It's certainly been exciting and fun to watch some of these former Cardinals, right? You go back to Game 5 of the Tigers and Guardians, and Lane Thomas with the grand slam to really put that one away for them and advance them to the next round, which is fun to see, right?
We're going to talk about each of these former Cardinal guys individually here in a minute, but I think the other thing I'd want to touch on before we actually launch into that is the thing I'm a little, I don't want disappointed is not the right word, but I think it's frustrating a little bit in that the powers that be in baseball are kind of getting their way a little bit with the three of the four teams in this LCS series now are among the highest payrolls in the baseball, in the Mets, Yankees, and Dodgers. And you know that baseball is really pushing for a Dodgers-Yankees World Series so you can have Ohtani against Judge. And even though I know that's great theater, I just still I'm rooting for Cleveland now. I obviously was rooting for San Diego before, but now I'm rooting for Cleveland. I just want them to upset the apple cart.
Well, if we go back to our prior podcast where we gave predictions,
you wanted Cleveland. I know, I remember.
I'm just saying, sometimes I know what I'm talking about. Not very often, but sometimes. But no, I think what's exciting about Cleveland is they've done it the right way. You know, their payroll's not super high. There's not a couple big guys there. But, you know, one thing that you could get into with Cleveland that the Cardinals have never really done is Cleveland also took the approach of signing a few guys to long contracts, i.e. Jose Ramirez. And he's been the storyline of their, franchise for a long time. And some people may look at him and say, well, he's not that great of a player. He's not that flashy or whatever, but he's going to probably have another top 5 finish in the MVP this year.
I would think he'd probably be third. Yeah. I would think behind Witt, Judge, Witt, and behind Judge and Witt, because I can't think of anybody who's had a better year in that league. So we'll get to some Cardinal conversation here in a second about both the Cardinals' past October performances as well as what's going on with the current club as they sit home and watch another postseason on television. But the other thing I think I think the frustrating thing about the division series, as great as the baseball was, I never in a million years would have envisioned the Padres going 24 consecutive innings without scoring a run as they blew that 2-1 lead against the Dodgers and then lost that series in 5 games.
It is very interesting to see how some of these teams just slow down at the end, right? But then you look at teams like the Mets and the Tigers and almost had to wait till the last day to get in, and the Mets are playing some of the best baseball around right now, and I think that's one thing that the commissioner's probably going to look at because he's worried about these teams that win the division then get bounced in the first round. And I think, we've got differing opinions on that versus the wild card or, how do you reward the guys that,
right,
have the most wins, right?
Well, the way you reward them is by don't have the wild cards. You just have to go straight into eliminate some of those teams. So you have fewer teams making the playoffs, but that'll never happen because they want that October. There was one time I think that Manfred actually proposed, and maybe it was during COVID, but he wanted like a tournament in the postseason that was almost longer than the regular season. And it was just
because obviously he's thinking about it from a money standpoint, right?
Sure,
and so
that's all he cares about.
TV, and that's all that matters to them. But if that's the case, and you want more teams in the playoffs, then cut a week or 2 off the season.
Mm-hmm. Sure,
you're not changing anything.
Big game from the Dodgers in Game 1 of that NLCS, and obviously the star of that game, Jack Flaherty. I think we were all kind of happy to see Jack pitch well. He returned home to Los Angeles. It's been worked out well for him there. He's a free agent again after this season is over, so it'll be interesting to see if he can re-up with the Dodgers. But I think it's he's probably one of those guys that the hometown kid that just really wants to stay there, and I'm glad he pitched well last night.
Yeah, it's good to see him doing well for sure. And, he's one of those guys that you look at and you're like, well, should we have traded him? Should we not? At the time when we did, this team wasn't going anywhere. And the prospects and players that we got back for him actually have turned out to be pretty well. So that's one of those trades that, I don't think Cardinal fans are going to look back on and say, hey, this was a bad move, more or less. Now, it's still early to tell on some of these prospects, but it's nice to see Jack pitching well.
And he was a free agent to be at the end of the 2023 season, and odds are he was not going to come back to the Cardinals anyway. So it's not like some of these other trades, Wayne Thomas, that happened over the years. That you wonder what would have happened had they not been traded few years ago.
And then the guy that I'm going to go on to say we're going to regret is Tommy Edman.
Yep.
I think when you look back for what we got for Tommy Edman, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Because
he's playing exactly the way for the Dodgers that I would have expected him to play.
Exactly. Yep. And what's nice is you looked at him last night, and he typically plays, I don't know, just seems to perform better against left-handed pitching. Well, with the setup last night, you knew Peterson was going to come in at some point, and he comes through with a couple base hits there, and great defense. It's exactly what you want out of him.
Yeah, I think that's the trade that the Cardinals, because not only the fact that Edman's playing well for the Dodgers, but he was still under contract for next year, and I still don't think the Cardinals really know what they're going to do in center field. I mean, I think they thought they were okay there. That's Yanni and Victor Scott, and you can still play Newbar there, but I don't know. I miss Tommy Edman being on this club.
And the ability that Tommy Edman can play almost anywhere in this club, right? You look at him similar to a Brendan Donovan type player, and maybe, I mean, Edman, in my opinion, is better than Brendan Donovan just because of what he can give you all across the field. But I think you're really going to miss that because, what happens at second base? Does Gorman figure it out here? Does he, keep striking out at 54% of the time, or does he figure it out? And you had Edman who could play there. You have Donovan who could play there. And so I think Edman is going to be one that we are going to look at.
And the other guy in that series, that's a former Cardinal, of course, Harrison Bader, traded a couple of years ago to the Cardinals, traded him to the Yankees. He's now, of course, on the Mets. Doesn't get to play a whole lot in New York. He's kind of been relegated to that fourth outfielder role. Comes in for defense if they're ahead late in the ball game, or maybe he'll come in if you need a key pinch running move in that ball game. But still an integral part of that club, even though he doesn't play a whole lot. And of course, he's another kid that got to go back home and play for his hometown team.
For sure. And I think that's a trade that, worked out well for us when we made that, right? Because it did what we needed. And when Montgomery was here, he was a great pitcher. Now, not so much since then, but I think we've lucked out on the positive side of Montgomery when we had him for a while and what we got back from him. So nice to see Bader doing well too.
And going into the American League Championship Series, of course, we're watching two former Cardinals in that. We already made a mention of Lane Thomas, who's got traded from the Nationals to the Guardians at the trade deadline at the end of July. There were rumors at the time that the Cardinals actually, were looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder. The one guy they might go get is Lane Thomas, and they instead pivoted and went to Tommy Pham in the Edman trade. You wonder how things would have worked out. It worked out pretty good for Lane Thomas. You just wonder what would have happened to the Cardinals had they, brought Thomas back.
Well, you can also look back to the fact that we had him from the start, and if we just would have allowed him to play, it's the same thing, same argument that we've made multiple times with these young kids, that when they come up, they really need to have time to play. And I understand at the time you're bringing them up, you need them to perform and you need them to play well, but you got to allow guys to work through the learning curve. And, as we've said time and time again, look at the case of Jackson Merrill with the Brewers.
Churio.
Oh, sorry, Jackson Churio. Yeah, you're right. Had a bad first half and then a really good second half because they allowed him to play through the growing pains.
Yeah, and I think Lane Thomas broke his wrist and hit by a pitch in Milwaukee in a game in September of 2020. Well, it knocked him out for the rest of the season. It probably affected him in 2021 as well. And then the Cardinals flipped him at the trading deadline in a deal when they thought they had a lot of outfield depth. And maybe he would not have played here, but I think that you throw him right into that group with Garcia or Rosarena. Hopefully not Dylan Carlson here at some point. That guys that. Because Carlson's a little bit different case because he did get a chance to play. He just unfortunately had all the injuries that he had to deal with and got into a situation where you just think a fresh start somewhere else was probably the best move for him. But I hope Lane Thomas does well in that series because he's a good kid and happy to see him getting a chance to play. The other guy I know that you and I both are happy with, you've had some dealings with him through some of the charity work over the year, is Luke Weaver. Cardinals traded him former number one draft pick, traded him to Arizona in the Paul Goldschmidt trade a few years ago. And so you have to say that probably trade worked out for the Cardinals. But and Weaver's a guy that's kind of bounced around a little bit since then, pitched for a number of different ball clubs. Finally landed in the Yankees. Finally landed in the bullpen and became their closer, lo and behold, in the first part of September because of the struggles that Clay Holmes was having out there. So, and he has been a revelation. I mean, he was probably one of the Yankees' best players in that series, the division series win over the Royals, and now he's going into this series as the Yankees closer. So you wonder what that means for his future as well.
Really happy for him and excited for Luke, because it's been a pretty incredible journey to watch him up and down, right? And to see some of this stuff the way that it's gone. And it's cool to see how well he bounced back, right? He really struggled in Arizona, ended up in Kansas City and was still struggling a little bit there. And they kind of moved him to the bullpen some, kind of used him as a starter some. But then when he got on with the Yankees, it was pretty much strictly you're in the bullpen and this is where it is. And then he just seemed to click and something happened. And I'm really happy for him that he's doing as well as he is.
Of course, I would mention that you're watching the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast here with Mike Reigns, Rob Reigns. All of this podcast, as they have been all season, available now anywhere that you can find your favorite podcast. You see all the listings there. Brought to you by our friends at Archwell Health, the Drury Hotel chain, family of hotels, as well as AAA Travel Missouri, and all of our other sponsors here on the website that can kind of keep all of our content free and available to you. No paywalls. So we appreciate all of their support and helping us be able to do that. And I think I think probably we speak for most Cardinal fans when you think about it, and you're watching these playoff games and you see the former Cardinals out there for one thing, but number two, what you don't see is the Cardinals. And I think that's something that we almost took for granted, I think, here for a long time from the 2000, on through 2020. Really, a lot of times Cardinals were in the playoffs far more often than they weren't. And even if they didn't get all the way to the win the World Series, which they did a couple of times, you still had a lot of fun October baseball memories. And now it seems like it's getting farther and farther away that we have those memories.
It does, for sure. And hopefully this team can find a way to turn it around soon. And, I don't think this team's far away, right? Mo has talked about a reset, not a rebuild. And I think we would agree that that's probably the case, because watching some of these young kids play, but it certainly would be exciting to be watching Cardinal baseball in October.
We've officially passed the 5-year mark since the last Cardinal postseason win in St. Louis, October 7th, 2019, Game 4 of the division series against the Braves, before they, of course, went down and won that series in Atlanta with the 10-run first inning. Yadier Molina, the walk-off single to beat the Braves in the 10th inning. And on that day 5 years ago, I don't think we'd be sitting here saying it'll be probably at least now 6 years until you have another potential postseason win in St. Louis, because the Cardinals were 0-2 in the wild card round in 2022 against the Phillies, and then of course they lost one wild card game before they went to the 3-game series in 2021 in Los Angeles on the home run off of Alex Reyes. 2020, the actually last postseason win, that was the COVID year. So all of those games were in San Diego. Cardinals lost that series 2-1 to the Padres to get a win there. So it's been a while.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would bet if you take those games since 2020 on or 2019 on, the Cardinals have probably scored a combined less than 10 runs. Would be my
probably.
Guess.
Yeah.
And
probably.
It's similar to what the Padres did, right? The Cardinals got into the postseason and they couldn't hit. But it's been the mentality of this club of get in and see what happens. Well, they barely slid in these last couple of years that they made it in, and they weren't playing good baseball. So we see what happens when they're not. So I'm very curious to see what the offense looks like next year to get back to the postseason.
And I know you growing up as a kid in St. Louis, obviously you kind of had some interest in it because of what I was doing at the time. But you have a lot of memories of going down to games at the ballpark, and especially those postseason games that you and your brother got to go to, and it was a fun experience. And there are kids today that aren't having that same kind of experience, and that's disappointing.
It is disappointing. And my first World Series experience was 2004 when we got swept by the Red Sox. Obviously not the goal that you want to start out with, right? But then we got to come back in 2006, and that was just a really fun and unique time to be at the ballpark, and everybody was excited and everybody was there. It was packed. I mean, there were so many people just standing outside the gates. I remember just wanting to be a part of history and be there. And to not let people see that and experience that is a disappointment, I think.
And I think obviously everybody who was there or around watching St. Louis baseball in 2011 will think about the David Freese game. We'll think about, Game 6 and even Game 7. I mean, those were just classic games that are going to forever be etched in your memory. And it's time to make some new memories of those moments like that. There's the parade. Yeah, we need a parade. We haven't had a parade in a long time now.
We need a parade. We have not had a parade in a long time. And it really takes everything coming together for those teams, right? A couple of those teams, one, for example, was 10 and a half games back in August and turned it on and started playing really well, similar to what the Mets did this year, right? And so you can see similarities there. And so, they've really got to dig deep and find some answers for next year, but we need a parade again.
And of course, I had the luxury of being the baseball writer for the Globe Democrat in the 1980s when we had a lot of success. My first World Series in 1980 actually was with Kansas City and Philadelphia, but then the Cardinals and Brewers in '82 and they win, and then '85, obviously with the heroics against Kansas City, even though Cardinals didn't win, it was certainly exciting. And then go up and play the Twins in '87. So there's a lot of fun memories of those years as well. And you still see some of those guys around from time to time. It's always fun to get together. And I think even the players, I mean, that's the thing that they remember too, as being part of the World Series championship team. And, you're going to have a lot of guys now that, go through their Cardinal career that aren't going to have that memory as well. So that's, think about it from a fan standpoint, but I think you also think about it from a player standpoint that we're talking about, past playoff moments and World Series moments. And, they're like the rest of the fans, they're just sitting home watching it on television.
And it seems like when you ask people or you bring up a memory or you bring up a story, it's the postseason that they come up with, right? Those are the exciting times they want to be with, right? And I don't know this answer, but I would almost guarantee it. If you were to ask Adam Wainwright today, what is the number one question that he gets about or the memory shared with him? And I would bet it's the curveball to Carlos Beltran.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of guys do. It's just winning the World Series, even if they had a very minor role in it. Their own personal performance was subservient to the overall team success, and their goal. Obviously, every player I think will tell you that going into a season, their goal is to be on a team that wins the World Series.
Absolutely, and for a lot of teams, you look at it, and the team's not built like that. But the tradition of the Cardinals year after year has been the goal is to win the World Series. Well, something happened over the last couple of years that the team has not been built like that. And so they need to reset and get back to that to get there again.
Obviously, not a lot of Cardinal news happening, since we did our last podcast because of the team just kind of waiting to kind of get some of the roster decisions that have to come after the World Series. One change that we do know of that's going to happen on the coaching staff, Turner Ward will not be back as the hitting coach. It looks at the moment like most of the other guys will be back. The Cardinals have not even officially confirmed that the Turner's not coming back, but we all know that that's going to be the case. But no other moves at the moment have happened. Did see a couple of things in the last few days. That Daniel Descalso was on the list of potential candidates to interview with the White Sox for their managerial job. So wait and kind of see what happens with that opening.
Yeah, and I think anyone that watched this team last year would tell you that offense was an issue, and so I think it's time to, change that up, right? Whether nothing's been officially confirmed that Turner Ward is out by the Cardinals, but it seems that way through all the reports that people are putting out there. And I think you look back to a couple of years when Jeff Albert was here and tried to create this philosophy of hitting throughout the minor league system, and I think it's safe to say that didn't work. The success is not there. So it's time to kind of rebuild all of that process throughout. And so I'll be curious to see what other changes come out here throughout the coaching staff, throughout the minor league system.
And the Cardinals not the only team, of course, that's changing coaches. I think, and I've seen references to a lot of them over the last couple of weeks since each team's individual seasons have ended. But I bet you there's been more hitting coaches fired or not renewed than any other coaching position. It just seems like every club is worried about trying to find offense in this game today, and they're you can't fire 15 players, so they obviously look to try and make a coaching change to see if they can get that spurred. I saw Atlanta got Kevin Seitzer let go, and there's even some other successful clubs that have decided to make a change with their hitting coach as well.
Yeah, I mean, offense is the key, right? That's what you got to score runs to win games, right? Doesn't matter how well you pitch. If you're only scoring 1 or 2 runs a game, it's not going to matter. And as I've harped on all year, our run differential was absolutely atrocious. And the only way you're going to fix that is to score more. Now, I know you could say, well, you got to give up less runs too. That's fine. That's all well too. Yes. But if you're scoring 1 or 2 runs a game, you're not going to win very many ball games anyways.
So we're waiting to see how the Cardinals what direction they decide to go in filling that hitting coach position, as well as how the rest of the staff is going to shape up. We're still waiting on Hein Bloom's first decision as kind of the heir apparent for John Mozeliak and the president of baseball operations to hire somebody to be the director of player development, and then all the minor league changes that they're going to be coming, as well as they've advertised with the coaching and instructing positions of the minor league. So a lot of news still to come here, probably once we get past the World Series. One Cardinal minor league note that did happen on Tuesday was the Cardinals officially named Quinn Matthews as their minor league pitcher of the year, and Jimmy Crooks, the Double-A catcher at Springfield, who was the Texas League MVP, was named the Cardinals minor league player of the year. So congratulations to both of those guys. And I think there's a pretty good chance you're going to see Quinn Matthews pitching in St. Louis at some point in 2025. I think Crooks is probably a little bit farther away.
And as we've said before, there's some good young talent on this team. And so I don't think that anyone's going to be upset watching this team play if they go the younger route, because a lot of these guys are talented. They play well, they play hard, and it's fun baseball. And I think that's all the fans want, is just to watch good baseball.
Players have for 5 days after the World Series to declare for free agency. So that's the decisions we expect Paul Goldschmidt to become a free agent. The 3 roster decisions the Cardinals have to make at that point will be on the options to Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, and Keenan Middleton. So it'll be interesting to see how they decide to handle those 3 options. And I think that will be our first indication, Mike, of really how deep these payroll cuts are going to go. If the club is going to really slash payroll, or are they just going to reduce it by a little bit? I think we'll start to get some answers to that when we see what happens with those options.
And I have no inside knowledge on this, but if I had to guess, I'd bet they try to cut this payroll by about $50 million. And it sounds like a lot, but I think they're really worried about this Bally Sports deal. And, I think that's the best hope, is that hoping something comes out of this from a TV standpoint. And if we're able to sign some sort of deal and have some money locked up, I think that's going to make a difference. But I think this year's – go ahead.
All right, sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say this year's offseason is going to be really different, because you've got a few teams that already have TV contracts or their own TV, or they have so much money that they don't care about the TV contract. And so they're going to spend a ton. And then you've got about half to a third of these teams that are so worried about the money from the TV revenue that they're not going to be able to spend any money this offseason. So it's going to be very interesting to watch the free agent signings this offseason, because only a few teams are going to have a lot of money to spend.
And there again, you get into the fact that the 3 of the highest payrolls are in the LCS. So our team's going to say, well, I can't spend $300 million on my payroll, so I've got basically no chance to win. So you go the other direction. So that's going to be interesting to see how that is handled. All I was going to say a second ago was the Cardinals could basically reach that approximately $50 million figure by just not bringing back Goldschmidt and by not picking up any of those 3 options on Gibson, Lynn, and Middleton. That would basically save you about $50 million off of the payroll from 2024.
And that's roughly how I got to that number. So if they decide to do that, that's where it would be.
You were always very good at math.
No, I was not, but it's close. But I did see that the next Bally Sports hearing is the beginning of November here, so maybe we'll get some answers out of that. MLB did announce that they're going to take over the broadcast for the Brewers and the Twins and a couple other teams, so they are starting to do some of that too.
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of news here to come. We do want to let everybody know that we may not have a podcast on the following week, because actually part of the news involving this show is that I'm going on the injured list. I've got surgery scheduled this week for a knee replacement, so I'm going to be kind of recovering from that. Obviously, if there are any breaking news stories that happen, big news, we'll still figure out a way to get you that information. But hopefully they'll take a couple weeks to not do anything, so I can get a little down the recovery road.
Let's hope that everything goes well, and wishing you the best of success with the knee.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for everybody for paying attention here and listening to this week's edition of Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. We'll be back soon with another edition here of Reigns on the Cardinals. Have a great day, everybody.